Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be talking a little bit today about managed detection and response and its role in helping you to secure the digital foundations you're all building on as you go through this transformation. I think what you're going to learn is that there's a lot of things that people can do, and as they're thinking about these changes, they can help make life a little bit easier and to help you structure a really strong basis for the way in which you intend to run these businesses as you move them online. So let's get going. I'm going to start off with talking about the way that this transformation is actually affecting people. As you think about moving to the cloud, as you think about interacting more closely with business partners or with your own customers, it changes the nature of the way in which your communications happen, the way in which you share information, and some of the confidentiality and privacy that you worry about. And in fact, it can actually impact the way in which you're servicing them, right? In the way in which you're handling transactions, the way in which you want your reliability to exist. But transformation dissolved what we used to think about as the original perimeter, right? The perimeter used to isolate us. We were able to take an external network and an internal network and treat them somewhat separately and pretend that that logical barrier was going to make a big difference in terms of the way we were able to decide how to protect things and how to protect services. But that's all gone away, right? The transformations we've been going through, the things that have brought us closer to our partners and our customers have eliminated that wall, have eliminated that artificial boundary between the two things. And so the challenge of security has gotten bigger with the elimination of that logical boundary. We find ourselves involved in a scenario where things are much more wide open. The second problem that occurs for folks as they go through this transformation is that there aren't really that many people around who are very experienced in security. It's still a relatively new space, even though I've been in it for about 30 years. That it's a relatively new space for folks. And so it's hard to find people sometimes who are capable of offering the advice and guidance and configuration assistance that you need to make that a secure transition for you. So it's a complex environment and it's hard to find folks. The third thing is the technologies that people apply to solve security problems are equally complex, right? And they are very niche. Security is oftentimes described more as a characteristic than a marketplace, because to be secure, you have to do a whole bunch of things well. And the technologies that arrive are all themselves relatively complex. So I've got a very complex problem to solve. I've got very few people who understand it very well, and the solutions that I can bring in to help me out, those are hard to run as well. And at the same time, attackers are just getting more sophisticated, right? So this creates a real problem in the aggregate of having very sophisticated attackers, a very sophisticated system to protect, and not necessarily a straightforward way to do it. And that was really, sort of the genesis of thinking about this problem. As people invest more and more in security, one of the things that we've learned is that the only thing that's really rising more quickly than people's appetite to invest in security is the cost and the number associated with the breaches, right? And so here we see a model where I've got a transformation to do things much more quickly, much better, taking advantage of things like a digital foundation that ensures that I'm going to be able to offer the service that I want, but securing it, right? Securing and ends up being a challenge. And we see from the figures that there's a lot of different kinds of issues that can arise that can make all that investment be less optimized than it could be in the end. So let's talk a little bit about this concept of left of boom and right of boom, right? MDR is managed detection and response. And what that does and what it means is the ability to decrease the likelihood of the impact of attacks when they happen. And sometimes I get the question that says, why MDR? Why does it exist? Why can't I just do all this prevention? And typically the way I respond is I ask, does anyone feel 100% secure in the environment that they're in? Would they go to their CEO? Would they go to their board of directors and say, we're 100% protected, don't worry about anything? And most people won't, right? And as you come to that epiphany, as you understand the fact that you're not necessarily 100% secure, then the next question follows, well, what are you going to do about it when something happens? And that's managed detection and response. And it refers to being able to detect threats. These are things like exploitable vulnerabilities internal to your systems. It may be misconfigurations. And it's also detecting things like attacks, right? When an attack is underway or when an attack is beginning to make incursions in your system, how do I reduce the likelihood on the left of boom? And how do I reduce the impact if something does get through to right of boom? And you can see the numbers that are up here. There's a lot of different challenges that are facing organizations, probably your organization. It's a challenge of cost. If you want to watch 24/7, if you want to have trained personnel around to respond to these things when they happen, you're looking at a relatively high expense. It's around $5 million a year. And when we talk about having enough skills, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier. We talk about having enough skills. Well, vast majority of organizations say they don't have it, right? They don't have enough skills. And so we see two big problems arise. To the left of Boom, we have drift. And all drift means is that on day one, let's say you did a fantastic job in the transformation and you're perfectly well secured on that first day. Well, probably on the second day, something's happened. Either internally, someone has reconfigured something, or new vulnerability has been discovered, or there's something happening in a framework, or someone just lost their credentials, and you start to drift, right? It becomes less secure over time. It's just the nature of things. It's like entropy. On the right-hand side, you've got dwell time. That's how long an attack exists and continues to corrupt or continues to exfiltrate data in your system over the course of time, right? And so between these two things, drift, the capacity to recognize that somehow my configuration of my services have become less secure, and dwell, which is something has gotten in and is beginning to cause me harm. Between those two things, you've got the challenge that MDR is intended to solve: decrease the likelihood and then decrease the impact if something does get through. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you've got to have some critical capabilities. An MDR provider has got to be able to serve you with critical capabilities. And on the left-hand side, you've got to have broad visibility, right? You've got to be able to see all the assets that matter. Blind spots are a huge problem in security and always have been. We used to refer to as that server in a closet that never gets updated. And so you have to have that comprehensive visibility. You have to have it 24/7. And that's really a technology problem, right? How do I gather all that kind of information? And how do I make sure that the platform is robust enough to handle its volume? At the same time on the left, there's a human component to it. How do I recognize what's my most important asset? How do I populate that system? How do I make sure that I'm taking my business context and making it a part of the way I think about my security? So there's a technology component and a human component. On the right-hand side, right, reducing the impact, I want to make sure that I'm staying up to date with threat intelligence. How do I make sure that I'm looking for all the attacks that matter? And in real time, how can I actually detect what's happening, whether it's anomalous activity or hostile activity, or I begin to see things happening that I know aren't authorized. So that's the technology gathering part of it. And then there's also a human element here. You know, people oftentimes say that there's a lot of alert fatigue, that security tooling can generate too many false positives to make people less sensitized when they actually happen. And so there's a human element as well that allows one to both analyze, to understand and validate, and then decide, right? To decide how to respond in a way that actually is optimal for the organization, so that it takes into account the business context, perhaps the time of year or the time of day or the sales cycle, that tells you what's the right response that one should take. It's a very human element in association with the technology that can make the recommendations. So when we talk about critical capabilities within MDR to secure the digital foundation we're basing all of this stuff on, there's these two components. It is both a technical component and a human component that provides the needs necessary to be able to enable an adequate amount of response and detection. So for us at AlertLogic, we've been building this for a long time. We've got MDR Manifesto, which describes for the industry really what is required for MDR. And it's written in a way that is not specific to AlertLogic. It's meant to help people to understand better what MDR means and what they should look for when they're evaluating vendors and technologies in their own sort of security portfolio. And I'll tell you that MDR is going to become more important. As you can see below, the analyst recommendations even say that there's going to be a vast number of people, particularly in the mid-sized part of the marketplace, they're going to rely on MDR as their sole element of security from a managed services perspective over time. And at AlertLogic, we've spent a lot of time developing that platform, the intelligence to feed it, and the experts who know how to translate it. I'd recommend it if you have a chance, get involved, learn a little bit more about MDR. You can see where the manifesto link is right there. Give it a read on your own. You can also come and fetch it. It's going to be available at the AlertLogic booth. But remember, MDR is a way to have external experts with their own platform able to understand the security needs of the organizations that you're working with. And for AlertLogic, that combination of platform, 24/7 visibility across all of the elements of your infrastructure, especially as you go through this digital transformation, combined with intelligence about the threats that matter to that platform, and then followed up with experts who can translate that data into the security responses that you need. Those are the core elements of MDR. Thank you very much for spending some time with me, and perhaps I'll see you at the booth.